Have you wondered what financial advisors actually think about finances? This is your sneak peek at the conversations within Financial Design Studio. Michelle Smallenberger, the CEO here, will be your host as you go behind the designs.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening in again to this episode of Behind the Designs. My name is Anna Lewis and I am the guest host for today. This is actually a follow-up to the previous episode titled Understanding the Inheritance Process. In that episode, Michelle explained the nuts and bolts of actually receiving an inheritance. First you organize, then you distribute, but then what? That's what we want to discuss today. And we want the financial advisor's perspective of what to do with the money you receive. So, your regular host, Michelle Smallenberger, has once again been turned into a guest. Welcome.
Thanks. Thank you for having me, Anna.
Yeah. So this is funny that we're recording the episode today because this morning you were talking with an estate planning attorney, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what's interesting is just when we talk about this inheritance process and what's involved or the timing of things, there's so many complexities that can come into play, and so we're always talking about these things with other professionals because we want to be sure that we're doing the best that we can in the planning, and we realize when we have our limits and we aren't attorneys, and so we pull in those people who are necessary. So it was fascinating to talk through these, and I think some of that stuff will even come out in here, as we're talking about this.
Yeah, for sure. And that's kind of the goal of this whole podcast, to share what we're learning with everyone who's listening so that you guys are also informed. Picking up kind of where we left off in the last episode, we left off with phase 3, which talks about, okay, now that the money is in your account from an inheritance, what do you do with it? How do you carry the weight of that extra money in your account that you weren't anticipating, and how do you steward it to the best of your ability? So normally, if you think about it, receiving an inheritance seems like something you would be really excited about. You might be feeling really spendy, but you have all these ideas of what you're going to do with the money. But that's not always how it goes. So as a financial advisor, how do you see people actually react once the money is in their account?
Yeah, I do think it is really interesting. Even people listening, if you ask yourself, or you just even think about, what if I were to inherit money from a loved one or a friend or anybody? You think about, I think we may have talked about this in the last episode, of just kind of what you think that would feel like, but then when it actually happens, how you really feel and your thoughts. And so I think that's interesting, kind of the difference of what you think before and then the reality of it and the emotions that come with it. So what is very interesting is that because of that and the reality of what that actually looks like when you inherit money, it can be for different reasons. It's someone either gifting you money to decrease their taxes when they pass away, or it's someone has passed away. And so now they actually are trying, you're actually inheriting money from them. And all of those situations can look so different. So for some people, that can be really sudden. For some people, they may know that their loved one, has health issues and they kind of slowly decline over time. And you have several years still with them. So you have time to talk through, have some of these meaningful conversations, really make sure that you know what they're wanting. But that isn't what happens for everybody. Sometimes it's very sudden. And you now need to learn everything that maybe you didn't know existed, or maybe you did, but you didn't realize how complex it was. And so I think that, not knowing the reality of what it will actually look like can really make a big difference of that process of you inheriting and the emotions that come with that. So I think that's why sometimes in every time it's so different for everyone in this process.
Yeah. And I know we at FDS have worked with quite a couple different clients who've received inheritances, and every time it's a different story. So what have been some things that you've noticed?
Yeah, one of the things that I notice is because it's different for everyone, sometimes it's really simple and sometimes it's very complex. And sometimes it doesn't matter if it was sudden or if you had a long time to plan. Regardless of what that was, it can still be difficult. So regardless of the consequences or the situations, we've seen people, walk through the emotions of that. At the end of the day, when we're talking about you inheriting money from someone else, you're really you're receiving something from someone that they wanted you to receive. And so a lot of times it's really trying to boil down. We know there's a lot of tasks that have to get done, but at the end of the day, really big picture, what's happening is that I'm receiving something from someone and they wanted me to have this. It was part of their plan. And so now it's part of my plan. And so when we really just kind of look at it from that perspective of here's what's happening, then we can break it into, okay, here's the tasks that need to get done from this in order to make that happen. And so very simply, regardless of whatever the circumstances were in this process, that's really all that's happening. And so our job is to really walk with clients through that. And we know there's going to be emotional conversations, and we actually welcome those and love those, because then you can have meaningful conversations through it too, because the emotions are raw and they are a part of this. And so we want to, laugh and cry and hear that from people. So I enjoy that part, especially, is just, because that they were meaningful to you. So at the end of the day, that's really what is happening, is you're receiving something and it's meaningful. And so what are we trying to accomplish? So that's big picture, in all of the different circumstances where people have an inherited wealth, whether it's from a spouse or a parent or someone else, a friend. At the end of the day, that's really what's happening. And so we're just walking along with them to make sure that happens.
Yeah, it can be really easy to forget that in the excitement of receiving some extra money, that there's a reason you have that money now, and that can be emotionally difficult to walk through, on top of the already complex process of taxes and laws and how are you going to get the money and death certificates and all of the administrative parts.
One of the interesting things, Anna, is even recently talking with a client who, is kind of walking through, how do I inherit this well, manage this responsibility? At the same time, where you're trying to figure out, how do I use this money best? Whether I'm gifting it, keeping it, going to spend it. At the same time, it's fun to hear people say, you know what, when my mom was alive, they would pay for a trip and we would all travel together. So I know that they want me to enjoy these funds that I'm receiving. Plus, if I want to give them, that was important to them too. I love hearing that from people, because they're realizing, wait, mom or dad didn't just want me, to be very wise with these funds, but also to have fun and live life. And, that was who they were when they were alive too. So I actually really enjoy hearing kind of those pieces from people, and when people realize that, because they're allowing themselves to live life and to enjoy that. And then also be wise with, how do I now handle these funds?
Yeah, 100%. So as a financial advisor, work with people who receive an inheritance, how do you help them process through the difficulty and start to think about, okay, now what are you going to do with the money?
Yeah. Yep. So like I mentioned, at the very core of this, you're really helping someone realize, so really trying to help people realize they've now received something from someone that wanted them to have these funds. So when you think about, your loved one and the estate plans that they set up, they chose you as part of who was going to receive funds from them. So now when you're thinking, okay, now I've received them, now you start to have this mindset of, now what? Now what do I do with these? And I think a lot of times this is where people can get paralyzed by, okay, I've received these funds, I know they want me to have them, but I don't know what to do. Or even they get stuck in the, I'm receiving funds, I kind of feel guilty, or whatever the feeling of it is. I think that can be paralyzing for some people. So one of the biggest pieces is, if you can see and understand, I'm inheriting something from someone that wanted me to have it, that thought, now you have a place you can move forward from. Now you can actually start to think, okay, how does this fit into my plan? And so I think that really right there, and that can take some time to get to. So that is where, with emotions and, the grieving process, that's where that's different for everybody, what that looks like. So I think that's sometimes what can make that, take longer or less time. It comes at different times for different people. And so that's really where, if we can get to that point, now we can start to think a little bit, but it does take time. And so that's kind of one of the turning points for people when they get to that spot.
Yeah, it's a perspective shift. And one of the things that we've talked about kind of in the office is, one of the things that makes receiving an inheritance hard is often because it's the mom or the dad who passes away, and all of a sudden now you, the beneficiary, are the new quote unquote financial head of the family. Could you just talk a little bit about what that means and what that looks like?
Yeah. So this is actually a really interesting topic. I've worked with clients where one, let's say it's the son and, an adult son who may be in his 50s. And he's kind of assumed, I'm just going to use this as an example, he's kind of assumed the role in this family of really kind of like the patriarch of the family. So he's the person where, people go to and they say, who do you work with as an advisor? How do you invest your money? Oh, and mom is also saying, you're in charge of my accounts because I really can't manage them anymore. Mm-hmm. And he's also in charge of his own personal finances. And so he's kind of just this role of, for lack of better words, like really the patriarch in this instance and in this area of their lives. And so it's really interesting. And so what will happen is you'll start to see that everyone kind of depends on this person. Mm-hmm. Now, sometimes this happens before someone passes away. So in this instance, I'm saying it's a son and the mom and even the siblings are kind of, looking to him for guidance. This can happen with women too. It can happen suddenly when, a mom passes away and now the kids are taking on that role. It is really interesting though, just to kind of watch and see. I mean, I love listening and seeing like, who do people listen to? So whenever you have a question about your finances, who is it that you talk to? Do you talk to your coworkers? Do you talk to your family? Do you talk to your parents? I actually love asking that question because that tells a lot about, how you feel about the people in your life, who you trust, who you look to. And in some families, this is a really tight-knit, web of anytime we talk about money and the different people involved, now that can shift over time. And so that's where it can be, from mom to son, but it could also be the son for many years caring for everyone. So a lot of this, there's a lot of different pieces to that. So some of it is, simply answering questions. Some of it is simply saying, here's a trusted professional that I work with. So if you're kind of in this role as the responsible one, you probably feel some of these pieces. You might be the one where you're kind of explaining things to them. So it's kind of an educational role. Mm-hmm. You're trying to help them understand the importance of them managing their finances well personally, so that when they inherit funds, they're going to do that well. So you're kind of taking on this role of, kind of a parent, but it's really in this one piece of their life, finances.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you have to help them out. Sometimes you're helping them make decisions or, choose when to give money. But these are kind of the different pieces or the different parts to this role, I think, that people can assume if they find themselves being that person.
Yeah. And one of the things you mentioned is sometimes that role gets thrust upon you suddenly. How do people carry the weight of that role when that transition happens so unexpectedly?
Yeah. Well, one thing, I think that naturally the person that's usually in this position is probably somebody who this is something that they're managing well in their life. So, all of us, something that we say around here is that there is a deadline to do your tax return every year, but there is not a deadline to start a financial plan or start saving or invest well or make sure you're doing the right things. And so, someone who has early on kind of said, I need to do these things for myself, and you start to do those behaviors. And as you're working and your career's growing, you're personally in your financial plan, you're on track. I think, that's the type of behavior that you would see from someone who you believe is going to manage your finances well. If you're saying, I want you to serve that role for me. So naturally, I think this is someone who already has kind of their ducks in a row, for lack of a better word. They're already well on their way in their plan, and they know what they're trying to accomplish, and they're trying to do those things step by step. Now, it could also be someone who's just kind of starting out and learning to do that. But I do think, these people tend to kind of be someone who have some inclination toward financial things. They enjoy it. They're interested in it, but they also have trusted people in their life that they know are giving them objective advice. And that's something I think that's really important. So naturally, someone like that is already going to be in a place where they know now when they're thinking about how do I inherit these funds well, they already have the person they're going to go talk to or the people they're going to talk to. They already know, and they're just kind of saying, here's a new topic, like here's something new we need to talk about. I'm inheriting wealth. And you know what? My sister needs help too in her own plan and how her funds she's receiving affect her plan. So I think, people like this, when it happens suddenly, they kind of know who to reach out to. The other thing that I notice is if you don't have someone, maybe in your family who has a trusted advisor to ask all these questions of, this is when I think people refer someone to, hey, I have someone who's helping me. And so So again, back to this, who do you talk to in your life? Are you going to be able to get the resources that you need in the time that you need them? So another thing that we'll tell people is sometimes there isn't time to learn everything you need to before you need to make the decisions you need to. And so this is where, again, kind of starting early, someone who says, I have a person who knows my whole situation. So when the time comes up that I need to make decisions, I already have them. They know my situation. They're going to be able to help me make the best choice, or to at least give me all the information to make the best choices. And so that's where, it's leaving enough time, giving yourself, the best chance of doing this well. So I think those tend to be the people who kind of assume this responsibility. If you find that you're not someone like that and this happens suddenly, what happens is I see families just kind of rally together. So, it may be parents, if one spouse passes away, it may be the remaining spouse and the kids who are helping her and saying, hey, mom, we want to help you get to a point where you know that your finances are in order. So I'll see that. So some form of that where you're kind of getting help. So I guess kind of a common thread in these is that I see there's someone coming alongside to help you. And some of that I think just can be like emotionally supportive. So if it's a family member that, is coming alongside and saying, hey, can I help you, make sure that you know what income's coming in and your bills are getting paid. If that wasn't their strength, you have someone helping you. And then you may also have an advisor for the big questions. But that's commonly, kind of what I see happen in that instance.
Yeah. Do these people ever come to you and ask what the right thing to do with an inheritance is?
Yeah. So sometimes, sometimes people will know I'm inheriting these funds, and I know that something that was important to my parents and is also important to me is that I want to give a portion of these funds to organizations or to someone else or whatever that is. So there are times where even recently, we had a client who reached out and was just really kind of wanted help thinking through this. And really kind of when we start with that first big picture, let's understand what's happening. You're receiving something. It is okay to see this, as a positive thing and not feel guilty. So working through the emotions. But then it's okay, well, now that it's a part of your plan, now how should you use this money? And that question or that answer is different for everybody. So now once the funds come into yours, you're really kind of starting to think through, okay, now that it's a part of my plan, what should I do with it? And so there's different factors that affect the answers to that.
Yeah. So what are some of those factors?
Yeah. So I would say like one of the biggest things is, and this might kind of sound funny, but the size of the inheritance. I just think naturally people think when you're inheriting wealth, if you work with a financial advisor, I think there are just kind of these thoughts that if you are in that situation, you must be really wealthy. And so I think it's really important to just kind of dispel some of that myth that, again, when we talk about, we're really just transferring to you something that you received, that someone wanted you to receive. We didn't say that's over a certain dollar amount or that's, so this is where it gets interesting because sometimes, people might have in their plan, they might say, well, I wanted to, we just built a new house, we're getting ready to retire and we're going to move to a different state. They might have in their plan, they're saying, well, we kind of wanted to put in a pool, but we weren't sure if we could, or we were going to wait a couple more years. But now they receive an inheritance from someone that they loved. And maybe now they have funds to actually accomplish that goal, that piece that's a part of their plan. So that was something that they had in mind. Now, it could be anything. This could be, someone needs a car or what do we do? It could be any type. I'm just kind of using this as an example. But you start to think through like, okay, like this was something we wanted to do and now we've received funds. And well, could this be put towards that instead of waiting a couple years? So now you start to think through that and say, yeah, it could. And you just put the numbers into your plan. We add these funds in there and we say, okay, does this help you accomplish this sooner than what you were hoping? And so, if it's something where, maybe it's a smaller amount where you find yourself maybe you've been out of college for several years and you still have a little bit in student loans. It can be really common because, at this point, if someone still has some student loans, they might have been paying, for the last 15 years. And so they only have a small balance. Let's say they have like 3,000 or 5,000 left, but they're not paying that off because it's such a low interest rate, again, for the people that were borrowing at that time to have a low balance. And so they may just say, you know what, this could actually help me pay that off. And so it could even be just something like that. So it can, again, when we put it into your plan, what does it help you do? And it can be paying off debt. It can be putting something in like a pool, doing something fun for your family that you thought, taking a trip. I think it depends on the stage of life that you're in. You might be young and you have young kids and you might be saying, we really wanted to start funding college education. We didn't quite have the money to start doing that from our funds because we're funding retirement first. But now this gives us something to kind of start those accounts with and let them grow. It can be any variety of these things, but I think it does matter, kind of the size, the stage of life that you're in, also other beneficiaries. So this is where sometimes, let's just say you have a few siblings and you kind of all know we're getting the same amount. And you might decide that you actually want to give a portion of your funds to a sibling or to someone else because you don't need them. And so there's all different, things that you can decide based on where you're all at, what life stage, what your families look like. I think there's so many factors that can affect that, but those are all things that you could think through now that it's a part of your plan.
Yeah. Does the size of the inheritance matter when it comes to deciding what to do?
It can. Yeah. So it depends. When I kind of mentioned like the size, so some of these, as we think about some of these things, we could say many of the things I mentioned are small. So paying off kind of a small remaining amount of loan debt, even putting in a pool. Well, that's not cheap. It's not like $300,000 to do that. So if you're receiving, a larger amount like that, now something that's very interesting that I hear from a lot of people is when we're building financial plans, and if you start talking, one of the pieces in the process that we talk through when we're building kind of the blueprint of, who's dependent on you or who might be dependent on you, a lot of times we think of kids. And so we think, are our kids going to need something from us financially? Are they going to need to move in with us? Maybe there's physical things that, we have to help them with. But also, we also think through and ask people, are your parents going to be dependent on you? So again, financially, or do they need to live with you? This is where pieces like this can make a big impact. Sometimes it is, and often it will happen where, people will build their plan and they might say, well, my parents are pretty wealthy, their health is not good, but I don't want my plan to be built on expecting anything from them inheritance-wise. Almost everybody really says, I don't want to build my plan based on what I may or may not be receiving from anyone. And that makes sense. It's actually, really nice to hear that. I can't think of anyone who has said, I want to plan on this unless it's actually happening. So what can happen in this instance if someone is inheriting a lot of money, let's say you are inheriting like over $1 million. If you're someone who you've built your plan, you've done this work, you are on track in your finances, now inheriting a large amount of money, you don't know what you would do with that. You don't have an immediate, I couldn't afford this, or I really wanted to pay off this debt, or kind of something smaller. I wanted to give 1,000 to this organization, but I just couldn't on my own. It's a very different now type of thought that you're thinking. And so now what starts to happen, this is where the planning becomes really important and can be really complex. But also, so you want to make sure you're inheriting it correctly. And we talked about how tax implications and how you receive it last time matter. But also, now what do I do with this from my plan? And that's going to have a material impact when we're talking that amount. So this is where it's actually really critical that if you haven't already gotten your plan, in place and you don't know where you stand and what financial planning strategies could make an impact in your plan, this would be a moment where you would say, now this is something I really need. This is a priority. I really need to start looking at this for myself because I need to know, even if these funds even if these funds are going to be needed in retirement, do I even need them? Or can I be gifting them? Can I be using them? You've got to know, if you don't already, that your plan's on track. You've got to know how this impacts that. So I think this is where, if it is a larger dollar amount, you've really got to make that a priority. You've got to say, I've got to start planning this. I haven't until now. And this is something that we tell people. We always say, once we start working with a new client, we're really moving on from today and going forward. There's always things in the past we wish we could have or should have done, but we're not judging you for those things. We're saying we're working with what we have today and what we know today, and we're moving forward from here. So there's no judgment. There's no, you should have done this. So the sooner that moving forward from today can be, that can just help you know, and it just relieves so much anxiety. I actually hear that from a lot of people. Anxiety is a word that's used a lot. I had another client meeting this morning, and we're just we're talking about employer benefits, like of how I put money into a 401k at a new job I'm starting. And just the word, this relieves a lot of anxiety of knowing where to save first and how much. I think what happens is we can get paralyzed in the not knowing what we should do. I don't have a prioritized list of the steps I should be taking. And that's really what you are gaining when you know you have a plan. So if you aren't there and it is a larger dollar amount, you really do need to say, okay, I need to get this in order. So in that instance, it can make a much bigger impact because the taxes could be much greater alone, but also the impact that you could be making could be even greater if you like to give. And if there's organizations that you're a part of, or there's change in the world that you want to see, and you can give to that, whether it's from your time or your energy.
Yeah, and that actually leads into our next question, because maybe you have enough. Maybe you already have everything you need. You're already on track to meet your goals. So how should people think about giving from an inheritance that they just received?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think this is kind of a fun question. Some people will know that they want to give from what they're receiving, and some, still need to think about it and decide, what am I going to do first and then next? There's so many ways you can think about how, if I want to give. And some of these just questions you could ask yourself. What interests you? Are there things that you're involved in, that you're really passionate about? Things that, you spend your energy or your time in? I could just think of like little ones, an organization where that they just need one piece of equipment to be donated, and that would make all the difference in the organization and the kids and, how they're doing in that sport or whatever. I think just little things like that can be anything that's small. It could also just be, what's the difference that you want to see? So again, sometimes people are like, I don't even know how to think about this. Well, what is it that when you look out, into the world every day, or you go and you leave your home and you're driving around, that you wish you didn't see? Is it poverty? Is it, is that donating food? Is that locally? Is that not locally? There's so many different ways to think about it. And so then it kind of becomes, what's the resource that I want to use to create that change? So maybe you have money. Maybe you've looked at your plan and now you've decided, I have X amount that I could actually give towards these causes that, as I answer these questions. Or maybe you say, first I'm going to give my energy and I'm going to help them. I'm going to get involved. I'm going to volunteer, and I'm going to give my time. And so now I'm using that resource. And now as I get involved, I can start to see it's an organization that I care about. And so now you can start to see, well, what are the needs? What are the things that if I give towards this, that it's going to make the biggest impact? And so then, some people like to get involved to actually see that first, rather than just kind of take the list of needs and check them off. Because sometimes if you send one round of groceries, next week they need another round of groceries, then the next week. And so you're really thinking through, is this a long-term impact that I want to make, a big impact, or is it just kind of meeting a need that they have now? So some of those types of questions start to come in about, what is it that you want to see done? What's the change you want to see?
And I think it's also worth noting that it's the change that you want to be a part of. So I love serving at an organization called Feed My Starving Children, and I could give money to them, and I do, but I also love being a part of the team that helps pack the food and is tangibly involved with giving food and hope to the people who need it.
Exactly.
And so I get to make an impact being physically involved
I think that's what, a lot of people, it's much more meaningful when you get involved and you hear the stories of the impact that's being made. If while, any organization, I don't know that I could think of any that if you gave them money, they would not want it. Any organization would love to have more funds to be able to do more with, to do more things for the people they're serving. But it can become much more meaningful when you are a part of it and you hear the stories and you talk to the people that you're impacting, or you go on a trip with them. Again, these are kind of the ways you could get involved. It could be locally, or it could be even more complex where you're traveling with them, things like that. So I think that's a great point. Yes, because some people, maybe want to give money and some want to be a part of it.
Yeah. And one thing that we highlighted was you give because you're passionate. So if it's not something that you're interested in, if it's not something you care about, then maybe you should look at something that you actually do care about and then give towards that and make the difference in that. So where to give and how much to give. How do you help people sort through the different organizations and the different opportunities to give?
Yeah. So in this is really kind of in talking with different clients, talking through them, talking through this with them and hearing what they've done. So some natural ways to get started. If you have inherited funds from someone that you love and you want to give, naturally you could just say, I'm going to give to the organizations that they gave to. And so for some people that might be $100 here, $50 there. It can be in any amount. So that's just a natural, easy way if you know who they gave to and you care to kind of continue giving to what they cared about. Then you can kind of say, okay, are there other organizations that I care about that maybe they didn't know existed? Do I want to give to those? So here's like a great list that you can kind of think through. Again, we're all part of different groups and organizations, but I thought this was a really good list. Actually, even a client shared of here's kind of, I kind of went down this list. Okay, no. So first, they just said, okay, wait, my alma mater, my college, or even high school, who did I give to? And, sorry. Where did I attend college and do I want to give money there? And so maybe yes, maybe no. And all of these, I think it's good to kind of say, where do you want to give? And then you can go back and say how much. So I think don't decide the amount and the organization or the place all at once. Kind of come up with a list of the who and then go back and add the how much, because then you can kind of decide by significance, in your life and what's meaningful. So kind of that school, college, alma mater, that can be a natural place for people. We naturally think of church. So religious organizations you're a part of, that may be a natural place again that you want to give to. Organizations you already give to. So this is kind of things that are meaningful to you. And again, this can be locally, like your local food bank, your local, but then also internationally. So people that you may not see, day by day, but again, you're involved and you're hearing the stories. And then at some point there may be an opportunity where you actually can travel to meet those people. So that can be, another couple of them. And then it's kind of the how much. So should I spread this out? Should I give it all at once? This is where it depends. Some people, sometimes I will tell people, maybe set a percentage. So for example, maybe a rule of thumb for them, or they may have decided the amount. Let's say they've inherited $100,000 and they say, I want to give 20% of these funds. So 20,000 of these dollars, they know they're going to give somewhere to an organization or some cause. They're going to give 20 of that. And so then the question can become, well, when do I want to give these? Do I want to do this over the next 10 years, the next 5 years? And so I think if you can start to break it down like that, then you could say, okay, if it's over the next 10 years, then I'm going to give $2,000 a year. That really starts to help you decide, well, how much do I even have to spread out if I'm setting these different timelines? You might say, well, 2,000 doesn't seem like a lot. You know what? I want to give all of this within 4 years. And so then it might be, okay, once I divide it by that, now that's 4,000 a year that I could give. So I do think if you can break it down to that level, that can help you. Again, it's just taking something that's really overwhelming, potentially, just kind of a big thing. I want to give this. I have to give this, into just meaningful kind of bite size. Okay, you know what? I could decide where I should give 4,000 in 1 year. Okay, these are going to be the organizations. And now that I know how much, I'm going to divide it between them. And you can decide if it's equally or in different amounts. But I do think if you can kind of break down that really big goal into smaller amounts, I think that kind of helps to make it seem more like you can actually do it in a year and it's not so big and scary.
Yeah. What should people think through in terms of order as they receive an inheritance? Should they fund retirement? Should they fund savings? When should they fund their own goals? And when should they give?
It's a good question. It depends. This is where it really depends what life stage you're in and the amount that you're receiving. People who have a financial plan in place. And when I say you have a plan in place, you know what you're going to do. It just means you've thought about it and you've kind of said, you know what, I know that I want to save. I know that, we're obviously going to spend money on our lifestyle. We have to live every day, but I have decided that I'm going to save some for the future, for when I don't work. But then there's, just also even just having like a financial plan in place, it's someone who's saying, I know I want to be doing these things. And so when I say having a plan, it's just that you've done the work to actually say, well, how much should I be doing then to reach my goals? At the same time of saying how much are you going to save, that's not all of it. You've also said, I want to be sure that if something happens in our lives, whether that, we're still living and I can't work, whether one of us passes away, whether we have kids or something happens to one of our kids, I want to make sure that we're protected for any of those situations. So a financial plan is really just saying we're covering all of these pieces to make sure that as we're saving money, it's protected. And if something happens, our insurance is going to pay for what happens there. It's going to cover those risks that could come. I know that what I'm saving for that goal and for this goal is not going to be affected because I've protected for it with my estate planning documents and insurance I have in place. So when we talk about having that financial plan in place, if you have that in place, that is what helps you be able to decide that order much easier. If you haven't done that work, then honestly, when you now find yourself with money that you didn't expect, you're going to go through that process and you're just going to be saying, okay, I don't know how much I'm going to need for the future. I don't know what I'm saving, but I'm doing something. And so now I just need to decide. And so you can see how that's a much harder decision because I don't even know what I need to fully fund this over here that I know I want to accomplish. So it's really just kind of makes it harder to decide. So in that order, it depends what stage of life you're in. It depends if you're retired and you have grandkids and you're saying, we have extra, I want to help fund, college for grandkids. If you're younger and you're saying, I want to start funding something for college, that's where you can see like the difference of age, stage, and amount.
No, yeah, those are great points. So as we start to wrap up, what advice or questions would you advise people to think about as they're receiving an inheritance and as they're considering everything we've talked about in the last 2 episodes, really?
Yeah, I think the biggest things, if I were to summarize really everything we've kind of talked about, is I think what people already know is that when people plan ahead, you're giving yourself the best chance of things working out the way you want them to. And whether that's for the relationships of the people that are involved, or whether that's for the money going to the places and the people that you want, honestly, by doing the planning ahead, you make that much smoother. A lot of times people who aren't working with an advisor or just who try to go it alone, things get very complex, kind of very messy. And how they are set up while you're alive is likely how they're going to end up when you pass away. If it's complex for you to manage each year, to file your tax return and to pull documents together and to figure out where I get money from, well, this goes to this account, and I just make it work in my head. Now imagine someone else who doesn't have all the knowledge you have in your head trying to make that work themselves, but they don't know what you knew. It just becomes very complex. One of the other big things is that estate planning is one of the biggest pieces of making this very seamless for people. And one of the hard things with estate planning, depending on an attorney that you work with, is you may pay anywhere from $2,000 to $6,000 to $10,000 for all of the documents that you need. So that's powers of attorney, a will, trust, all of those pieces to make a complete estate planning package. And I think what happens a lot of times is that, people will kind of shy away. That is a big dollar amount. That is expensive. And so they will say, well, I don't want to pay for that right now. Honestly, what can happen is if you don't pay those funds up front, if you don't pay for the plan, you actually might pay a lot more in taxes to inherit money that could have actually gone to people tax-free or much lower. And so in the end, what happens is, a lot of people could end up paying a lot more after they pass away, or, their beneficiaries are paying more than if they would have just paid for kind of that package of the documents up front. So it's just kind of one of those things where sometimes, paying a little bit up front saves you a lot later. So just some of those things, that's kind of what I see in kind of helping people work through this process.
No, yeah, for sure. Do you have any closing thoughts that you want to leave everyone with?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that we love helping people kind of along this journey of, when you're inheriting wealth, something hard has happened. So a loved one has died, someone has passed away, and they're, people are really meaningful to us. And so it is really hard, and there's a lot of emotions around it. So this is where it's critical to get help or to have help to walk through this process with you. And we know that the emotions are part of it. And that's actually what makes like every client journey so interesting and valuable, because we care about all of that. And that's why so much of this planning, it depends on what matters to you. So this is where, even just giving people hope that there's people out there to help you, that care about you, that we want to see, this work well so that you can, live more and give more too, just like your loved ones who are now giving money to you. So, just some, hope and just helping people understand that it can end well, even if it's a rough start, there's people to help you answer your questions and help you through the process.
Yeah, it's going to have a happy ending. You don't have to go it alone. All right, with that, we've reached the end of this episode. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. If you are someone who, like we've talked about, is in the middle of structuring or receiving an inheritance, you don't have to go it alone. So you can check out our show notes where we have a lot more resources to help you think about and understand estate planning and inheritances. But you can also reach out to our team to ask any questions you might have. You can find both options at our website, financialdesignstudio.com. But we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening. To find any links or resources related to this episode, check out our show notes. Your host was Michelle Smallenberger, a certified financial planner and CEO. The guests featured are from Financial Design Studio, a team of experienced, fiduciary, fee-only advisors based in Chicago. Anna Lewis is the executive producer of the Behind the Designs podcast. And as always, for more information about Financial Design Studio and who we are, check out our website, financialdesignstudio.com. And final note, no content discussed on this podcast should be taken as financial advice. Financial Design Studio accepts no responsibility for your individual choices. We'll see you in the next episode.